Hello everybody, welcome again to another installment of Open Book Tours. Today we have with us Deborah Greenwood, who is a wonderful artist who does extraordinary forms, as you will see. One of the things that pleases me about Deborah is that she has the perfect background and training for being a book artist. She got her undergraduate degree as a psychologist. She got her PhD in mythology. She has focused a lot on depth psychology and archetypal forms. And with all of that, you know, what else would you do except become an artist book artist? And I'm only partly joking about that. I once asked my brother, who analyzed mutual funds, what the best training would be for his job. And he said, oh, studying ancient Greek or Latin or maybe medieval history or library sciences. And he said that what you want is the breadth and the depth of understanding and a larger worldview. And I think that all of Deborah's history and education has led that to her. I am so delighted she is here, and I'm pleased to welcome Deborah Greenwood.
Thank you very much. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you all for coming. It's a rare pleasure, really, to be able to talk about your work. And a lot of times, if you try to bring up about your book structure or you talk about things like that, your friends their eyes droop and they all kind of start to fade. So it's really lovely to be here. What I wanted to do was I was asked to talk a little bit more about the toroidal book and some of the books here, but what I wanted to do is to kind of give a context for you of how my work has evolved using ephemera and postcards, and maybe even if we have a little bit at the end, I would just show you some of the experiments of things that I've been working on today. What drew me to the toroidal book, I think it was in 2014, I went to the Paper and Book Intensive, and I noticed that one of the classes that they were offering was by a man by the name of Ken Leslie, who specializes in making these toroidal books. A toroidal book is basically like a donut shape. And one of the things that, and I'll pass this around, that Ken specialized in is that he's a landscape artist. And, so what he does is he'll pick a place in time and then he'll study it for a period of time. And for each section of the book, it's a time interval. And so I knew that I wasn't, since I wasn't a landscape artist, that as a collage artist and someone that really likes to work with patterns, and that I was going to have to come at this from a little bit different perspective than his. So what I wanted to show you is kind of how I've led up to working with some of these materials and why circular forms have been really of interest to me. I started out actually working with postcards in a way that was really not as abstract. I was using the postcard and I was trying to illuminate maybe an idea or a thought, but it was a little bit more concrete. You know, there was an actual image in it, and even though it might be broken, that you could you could concentrate on this, and you could really still see the figure. And what happened to me is, it's kind of interesting. It takes me a long time usually before I can even begin to do like a little series of things, because it takes a long time to collect the materials. And it's sort of like what happens is I go to a lot of ephemera fairs, and initially I used to go to antique stores, but they keep them in places that it's so dusty and musty, and it was really kind of hard on my sinuses. So I decided I'd go to places where there would be a whole lot of them at once. And so I go to the Greater Seattle Ephemera Fair. And what would happen is for like 2 years I kept finding all these waterfalls. And then I was also finding a lot of real life postcards of people. And a few of them were postcards were people with dogs turned up. And so in this particular one, there's this young lady and she has a pug. And it's not very common to be able to find these pictures with animals in them. So what I did is I began to realize that if I took and I juxtaposed these waterfalls, because these waterfalls had personalities. Some of them were like moonlit, some of them were like on a sunny day, or they had a split falls. I did one with some twins, and there were like the falls were one at the top and they split in two. And so I started finding all of these different ones that related to different people. And then on the back side, I would do something kind of fun. These were all, these are scans of postcards, these particular ones. And what they are is of all different pugs that I found in advertising. And then I just kind of did this thing where I used an old map of like the heavens. And what I did was I colored it and juxtaposed it kind of over the surface, because I was feeling a little bit like this is me being pulled back. This is us now in this contemporary time, and having a little bit of fun with it, maybe in a little bit different way than people who would have been enjoying these advertisements from which I pulled all of those images. So this is how I began. Oh, here's my little thing. The other thing that I really liked about these window shade books is they're like a little bit of theater. You can put it in its box and then you can take it out for someone. And they really have their own little personality. And then I had a trouble because people wanted to see them from both sides. So I tried creating all of these little apparatuses. And one night I woke up and I said, plexiglass. This could work. So what I did is I created a stand. And I'll put this down so that it can be seen from both sides. You could set it somewhere and you could enjoy it. The first one that I made had a little bit different feel to it, and I wanted to show you this one. I used to make them with these boxes, but sometimes it was hard to find the materials to cover them with, so that they would. But this does remind me of like an old little trunk, or a glove box or something that might be very special. And what we've got here is, as you pull it out of its little box, you begin to see. And this was even starting to be a move more toward, a concept without the waterfall. And here we have all the big ships. And I was thinking about all of the times, these guys are whalers. And then there's people hunting for bigger fish during the war, these different postcards. And so on the other side, I created this other fish, and I was thinking of the salmon of wisdom. And at the bottom of the pond, there's always the big fish. And so this was kind of my beginnings for putting my books together. Okay, I'll put that one there. My first real foray into using the materials of postcards, as raw material, was this book, and I called it Sea Change. And what I did was, I used all postcards as color. I used skies and sunsets and water. This whole thing is all made like that. And so what I tried to do was to create textures and like, how the sun arcs in the water and that sort of thing. And so all of these are either papers that I had manipulated. At the time I wasn't making handmade paper, but all this was, I dyed these and I manipulated these of different colors. And if you, I wish you could see this. Well, I'm going to pass this around. The light shines through these thin papers every so often through the postcards. And it's really a neat thing. I mean, I really liked it. And I was like, oh, wow, I think I've this was a real breakthrough. Well, the construction of it, as far as it being even, isn't as big a breakthrough as I had wanted. But what I liked is that I hand sewed this one, and then I used, because I used the postcards, the front and the back. So what's on the front of the book is really the front, and what's on the back is really the back of the piece of paper. And I was thrilled when I discovered this, you know, because I thought, wow, all this great written word and all of these other kind of things you can't plan, you know, the spontaneous little points of things that happen that intersect with our lives and so forth. So I just love that aspect of it. And I tried to kind of play that out with a lot of the books that followed. I do some planning. You know, obviously I know what structure I'm going to use, and I know I draw out these geometrical forms and so forth that I'm going to show you. I have an idea of the colors it's going to be, and I have an idea of where the shading is going to be. But in general, what happens is you start to have this one-on-one dialogue with the postcards. And you pick that up and you go, wow, you know, this is not going to work, or oh, this really ought to be over here, you know, that kind of thing. And so I started that dialogue, you know, in several ways. This was a book that I made after that one, and the one that, this one here. Actually, I want to show you this, and I'll pass this around while I'm talking about it. This is called A Bird of a Different Color. And I thought, well, what would happen if I collected all these postcards and I found all of these like book things from old books that had birds on it, excuse me, and I sorted them into colors, and I created these kind of discs of color. Well, I made the discs, and what happened was, you know, I didn't like it when they were too demanding, when they were in just the red, the yellow, and the green. They were so powerful that you just couldn't stop looking at the circles, you know. So what I did is I cut them into pieces, and I arranged them so that some of each is in each other. And I think that's kind of a neat discovery, because you could say it's kind of a metaphor for a lot of things, you know, too much of one thing. But if you somehow, with the brightness of the colors and the integration of each one of these circles, one with another, they really held together, and I was really pleased with the piece. And then again, on the back side of this, what is on the back is really the back. That's really the postcard. And what I do is I hold them together by cutting little strips of curved paper, and I glue the pieces together after I've made a pattern. And I'm going to show you more about that so you get a better understanding of that, so that you can still see part of the postcard. And then I realized with this sort of a book, I was going to need a very nice flexible fold. So I couldn't use the cardboard, and so what I did is I used fabric. And then I glued, I had these old manuscripts that some of them had been cut up, and so I used some of they're cotton, and so I thought that would make a nice way to fold the book in and out, would be by using that. Okay, I'll pass that one around.
I'll start it the other way.
Oh, here we go. Thank you for that. This is the cover for it, and sometimes that's the biggest challenge, is to make something that protects the book and it has a little home. And I've really tried to think that through for each of the books. And this I thought was a kind of a neat little enclosure for the book as well, and echoing, you know, the patterns of it. Then I could put the colophon on it. It would be there, since I couldn't really put it on the book itself. And it all tight, it folds, just kind of wraps around it. And then with little buttons made out of postcards, you just kind of put the elastic around, and the book's inside. So it's a nice, neat little package. I really like that. And then it's kind of like a little bit of the theater again, you know. You take it out, and you can put it away, which is kind of a nice way to do that. This was some of my early foray into before actually I did these other books, I had started making handmade paper. So I wanted you to see that that I've just been really fascinated by these circular forms, the circular forms of. And so what I did is I had made this paper and I ran it through my laser printer, and I made all these sheets out of old science diagrams, and they're all different types of seeds. And what I thought was really fun, and how I started sewing on some of these books that I made with postcards, was I loved the way that it kind of transformed it. It kind of gave it another, it strengthened it so that pages could be turned and they could be looked at, but that it really didn't, it added something, it's something of value, you know, to the actual design itself. My first one I hand sewed, and then after that I got braver, like this little one that didn't become part of the that book, A Bird of a Different Color. This was my first piece that I made to see if I could actually do it. And then what I realized is that this one had so many olive tones in it, and it wasn't quite bright enough to be able to work with all the other ephemera that I found. And so I think sometime I probably will mat him and frame him or something like that. I really like that little bird. Okay. Well, what I want to do now is kind of get into the toroidal book and show you how I kind of came about doing that.
Can you spell toroidal for me?
Yeah. Toridal. Toroidal, really.
Oh.
Toroidal, yeah.
Thank you.
And this is the book I wanted to talk about. Is this one called The Land that I did. And it took me a very long time and kind of a special occasion to use these postcards. I had been collecting farm postcards and postcards that had to do with the land for about 11 years. It took me that long to collect enough postcards to be able to do this. And there was a show, it's called Dirt, and it was about the year of the soil. And so I thought, gosh, I think maybe I can pull enough of these cards together to make something that would be both, meaningful for me and meaningful for other people. What drew me to these postcards was, one, the images, but also there were so many messages on here. A lot of them were, people really did communicate a lot more using postcards in the 1800s. And there would be things about like, there's more work over here, send Joe, or something like that, just a brief line. Or somebody would say, I got home. I'll read you the colophon. Okay. A search for synonyms revealed many associations to the word dirt. As well as soil and earth, land referred to agriculture. It also surfaced as political territory, and sort of like my land or one's native soil. This toroidal book is an exploration of the archetypal relationship humankind has with the land, as told through the images on postcards from the early 1900s. These brief writings speak of farm life, work, or convey expressions of awe or delight as they revel in the land. And here's a couple of just little lines from them. Dear sister, all done with grain, quite little rain, have done thrashing, turnover very poor. That was in 1913. Another one is, hello wife, just arrived from the ranch, house nearly done, and 2 calves, both very much alive. Dear friends, don't think that I've forgotten you. Altitude 8.117 feet. I climbed it today, 1936. So I wanted to encompass in this particular book the darkest, places like of rock and canyons, and then I wanted it to kind of bloom into this harvest, this the land and the golden colors. And then I thought, well, I'll make the sky, you know, using the skies, and then I'll also use the words, some of the words from different letters and things that I had found. On the back side, what I did is, these are the backs of all the postcards that I used. And I knew that I was going to have to create a flexibility for each one of these spines. So underneath each one of these pieces here that form the spine where the book folds, is cloth, and I folded over the top of it are pieces from these pocket. I had it right here. That's the thing of bringing too many things. Oh, here it is. These pocket ledgers that they used to give out to the farmers, and it's really kind of fun because there's places for notes, and then there's all this stuff in there about tractors, and then there's a thing about purchasing things, and then there were charts about laying times for chickens and all kinds of different things. And so I found several of these that had been written in, and so what I did is I used that to cut out and put on these hinges here, and then also for some of the co-joining of the different postcards. Okay. Now the neat thing about these books is that they're circular, but they still fold in on themselves. So you can see that and so the book can be looked at, you know, from a variety of ways, you know, and it can be set in a variety of ways, so that you can view it from different vantages. And that was one of the things that really appealed to me. So it can kind of be like this. It's kind of, I've got things looped up here, but you can see it could really be kind of a lot of fun different ways to do that.
How did you figure out the degree that you had to use? Because it's not a perfect 360 because you've got this spine.
Yeah, what happens is that you, that I learned from Ken, was that you, it's the diameter of the circle times pi,
Right.
and then what you do is you subtract out what the spine is going to be, and then you take that and multiply.
Sure.
But it's it doesn't come out exactly. Yeah, so I made a lot of models before I said, if I'm going to cut up all these postcards, you know. And the thing is, you really got to use the real thing. If you try to Xerox things off and put them together, you know, it doesn't work. And also, it's sort of like there's something about the passion and the energy that goes into a piece and its freshness that disappears. I tried it because at first I was a little afraid, and I thought, well, I'm not sure how that's going to work. But so I made sure that I made models, and and I wanted to make them out of material that would be similar to postcard material, not too thick, not too thin. So what I used was file folders. I love the Goodwill outlet, and I go there, and I'm always looking for, like, I buy file folders, and I collect a lot of ephemera, so I get my plastic pocket things there that people dump out and stuff, and all my notebooks come from the Goodwill outlet. So I feel kind of good that I'm rescuing some of these things and turning them into other things that can be a little instead of trash. So that's what I made that out of. And then I had to figure out how in the world I was going to put it together. And I realized that this was kind of too complex of a form for me to just play around with, you know what I mean, and like hope that it came out. Because one of the things that happens when you're constructing something like this is you're trying to cut each one of these pieces exact, but every so often what happens is it might be just like a little millifraction too small or too big, and so it starts to go wonky on you. So I knew if I was going to do something that I was going to fold, and there was going to be a circle, that I was really going to have to be attentive to the shape of the thing and to my plan. So what I did is I went into the internet, and I wanted to make this somewhat of a yin-yang symbol, because I felt like it was like humans and these other forces beyond them, the weather, the wind, all these different things that come into the play of our interaction with the land. And I luckily found a really small image that had a yin and a yang on a circle. So I pulled it into my machine, and then I made it really big, but I could only print it off in sections. So then I had to lay this out and reconstruct it with the sections. None of these little brick-like things were on there yet. It was just the circle with the yin and the yang, so that I could make sure that I got, I started out with something that really was a circle. In this particular case, so the yin and the yang would fit on it. Then what I did is, I brought some of the tools that I have. This is a flexible ruler. And it works really, really well, for making sure that you are, getting things. I don't know if you guys in the back can see that, but you can manipulate this so that you can make sure that you're really getting it on where you want to get it, so that it doesn't start to go over the edges of your... This is another great tool that I found for drawing circles, and you can take this thing and you can slide it back and forth, to make a circle the size. So after I did this, I made sure it was really perfect before I started this other, trying to build, how am I going to divide this up? And what I did with that is I used a smaller compass. So I got really techie on this deal. And I had to learn how to put this thing on, which goes in one of these legs, so that I could go out from a certain points and swing that around to get these internal lines. And then I divided them up. Then I went upstairs and I scanned this back in. Because what I had to do is I had to have pattern for cutting out my pieces, and that's what I did. And so see these numbers right here that go around like this, they're all these little things are numbered. What I did is I kind of coded them, each one, so that when you start cutting into it, you would recognize it on the table. Like for instance, I had to start when I was building this, and it's maybe more information than you want, but in order to build this, I started over here because I knew that I was going to need to have a sharp edge to build my other part on. And as you can see with the book, where did it end up? Let's see. Oh, here, so I still have it. I haven't passed it around yet. These are the kinds of things that you don't realize when you take on a project sometimes, is that to make this work, I wanted to have mostly harvest at the end, and I had to have green right here, but I was going to have to somehow merge and marry this darkness into this, and there'd be a little bit of a middle ground for each one of these. So I couldn't just start at the beginning and start building it around. I had to go out here and figure that out on the edge, and then I had to go over here and figure that out over the edge, and I had to be able to pick this thing up and flip it over in order to glue these little things on to hold it together. So each one of these, when I pass it around, each one of these little things has to be glued so that so it stays in place. So it was really challenging, but I had a lot of fun with it, actually. I mean, I really looked at things closely in a way that I hadn't before.
These aren't rectangles. I mean, you had to have the right curvature on every single one.
I did, and so what I did is, and I wanted to show you how I did that, I brought a little pair of scissors. What I did is I cut out, and a piece. And at the time I tried to cut it as perfectly as I could. And then I would find, you know, a piece that I thought is, yeah, that's good, okay. And also, I love it, which is something that isn't always so easy. It's like, no, it's just not got my feeling to it, you know. So then what I did is I would hold this in place, and I will cut it. I'm trying to do this for the camera. I will cut it. So that's why I had to have those things color-coded. No other piece will do. There probably is not one piece in there that's the same. You know, so then what you've got is you've got your pattern and you've got your piece. And you can lay it on there. Now, once you've started building this, if it doesn't fit just right, you know what, you can sand it. You know, with sandpaper. And if that doesn't work, then you try to lay it in there and figure out what needs to be clipped off so it fits in there as perfect as it can. There's some that's not really perfect in there. And that was really basically how I put the book together. At the end, you know, you put those last few pieces in, it's a thrill. You know, it's like, I did it, yes, will it fold? But I hadn't cut it yet. So I had to cut this in pieces after I was done. And then I put the material in between. And then I covered it with the ads that I showed you. And that was a really good feeling when it really fit. You know, it really folded up and it really unfolded, and I felt really good about that.
How long did this take you?
It took me 6 months to make this book, and that was working almost every single day. And but I was really happy to go to it. You know what I mean? It just really felt. It felt really good to work on that. I love these postcards. I don't know how to relay how much I love these postcards. And I spend a lot of time looking for them, you know, and looking for stuff to make things out of. And so it's like a real pleasure to look at them and have them transform into something different. I wanted to backtrack a little bit because I want to make sure that, I'm not sure how I'm doing on time here. Yeah, I have a little bit of time to talk a little bit about Ken's class and the first toroidal book that I made, and still leave some time at the end. Basically, I made the cover for this one pretty much the same way, and what I did is I had to kind of draw it out, and then I wanted to make it so it was just really a simple wrap. And then I found this really neat bone button, which I thought really kind of looked really elegant with it. Ken's class was really, Ken Leslie's class was really a wonderful class to take, because it really did help me to think in a little bit different way about, you know, maybe manipulating and using books, and also about the way that the creative process works. A lot of times like I said, I collect things, and I'll find pamphlets or booklets of things, and then I go, I'm not really sure how that I'm going to use this, but I just can't leave it. You know, this was like 50 cents in this really junky box at the Portland Antique Expo, and I just kept going back, you know, and it smelled kind of musty. It still smells old, but I just loved these, you know, these weird kind of things that that were made with these things, and how they kind of look like a real thing, but not really, you know. They're very strange. And so when I thought about going to Ken's class, I thought, well, you know, I'm going to make myself components. And instead of doing the landscape, I think what I'll do is I'll build something with these, and I'll make something, and I'm not really sure. I'll just trust the moment and I will do that. But a lot of times it takes a lot of preparation in advance, because what I did was I scanned in all of the elements, and then I had to color them, different colors, and I had to make a range of colors. Like these are some of the little spanners and stuff that I used, and I can pass this around. This is the book that I made. I don't have this. This one's at Vamp and Tramp, and it was in that book show in Bellingham, Unhinged. And what happened was, is in the class I built a structure on his paper, but it was too rigid, and when I folded my book, it split. You know, all the images just split. It still was a kind of a neat thing, and I'm sorry I can't find it. I've looked everywhere for it. I have so many of my stuff I keep together. But so what I did was when I recreated it was I took my pattern and I put it underneath plexiglass. What I did is I had Xeroxed off the book that I hadn't really gotten completed. And then I put it under plexiglass, and I taped a piece of silk to it. Oh, here, I'll hold that up one more time. What I did is I put this under plexiglass, and then what I did is I put a piece of silk tissue on it and taped it down securely. And I could see through the silk tissue, and I could build it on the silk tissue. And I used Kozo because it's a kind of well, it's a crisp paper, and it really went well. It works really well in my laser printer, and I was able to print those out. And then I was able to, on one side, I built the whole thing up, and I flipped it over, and I built the whole thing on the back side. And so then, when I folded it, it folded, and it didn't rip, and it's really very strong, although it seems very fragile. And so with these, what I did was, I cut out all the white space, so it's just really lacy. And was really cool about it is when it's hung on a wall or it's hung someplace where all the shadows go through. It's really neat looking on the wall. It has a real presence, so it's really kind of a fun piece. So what I did was these are the little components that I made, and initially I made them out of I couldn't use the ones I used for the class. I had to redo them and put them on this Kozo paper because they wouldn't have been as strong. So I spent a lot of time cutting things out. But it really turned out, I think from the pictures you can see I took pictures of it from all different aspects. And that's one of the things about these books, is that they reawaken your sense of how you might look at something and how you might preview it. While we were in Ken's class, he he encouraged us to make a one that would be like a journal, and that every day we had to complete one little aspect of it. And so I made mine like, well, here's my head, and then here's a ladder, that's coming from somewhere, and there's all this confusion and chaos, and then on the other side, when I get to the other side of the book, it's like, something is coming together, So this was my first day at class. It was making paper, and it was a terrible rainy day. And it was really cold, and so it seemed like even the river had eyes, so I played with that. And actually 2 days, that was 2 days in class. Then that was in the toroidal class. I felt like I was dreaming about measuring circles, and I couldn't get it out of my brain. And then this was the show for the first half of the program, and I said, wow, I'm not sure I want to show that to anybody. That blew my mind, obviously, seeing all the people's books in the classes. And then we had a day off. And this is I felt like we got like an overview of the little town and the city and everything. Oh, that was there. And this was I took a class, and it was called Impress Me. And it just was totally different. And I was so excited, so I picked orange and red in order to discuss it. And then at the end, it's kind of like this wonderful, ecstatic experience, open books. And so when you open the toroidal itself, well, I missed a few for you guys, but you can see it's kind of a cool thing. You know? And these big ones that are kind of stiffer, really, you can really mount these on a wall. So that would be kind of a fun thing to try to experiment with a little bit. So that was,
And what paper is that on?
this is on a roll of watercolor paper. And we had to paint it with water on both sides to get it to lay flat. But it's really nice paper. I think it wasn't very expensive. Yeah, sure, you can pass that around if you'd like. And there was one other thing I wanted to show you before I answer any questions that you might have, is kind of where I'm going to go with it. You know, what I've been working on. And this has been, well, I would say the last year and a half has been a lot of exploration. I've taken a lot of different classes. I've been making paper, and what I wanted to do is to find a way to manipulate paper in different ways, or to fold paper that later I might, you know, use my ephemera and make something else with it. So this was the last time I went to the Paper and Book Intensive. One of the classes I took was on embedding things in paper. And so I have collected a lot of Godey's type books. And so what I realized was I was going to have to print these on my own paper in order to get it to embed into the paper, because it wouldn't drain. The other paper from the old books is made differently, and it wouldn't, they would just puddle up and wrinkle, and I couldn't really control it. So these, I copied those, and then I made these. And I thought maybe at some point I would find a way, beyond just making some small collages, to cut these up and use them in, you know, folded type books. And here's another one that I did that way. And so this is kind of more of a movement toward, you know, something that you could cut, and you could maybe arrange in a way that as it folds, you know, something would be revealed.
What's this paper made of?
This paper is made of daffodils. So, yeah, I've experimented with plant materials, and but then this last year I took a class in, I'd been trying to make Japanese paper, but I actually took a class in it, and amazingly I've learned a lot, and my paper's turning out, it's turning out very much better. And this was one where I tried to combine some elements, the Godey lady and some of my earlier explorations in plant things, and, you know, working with, well, where could I take this? So these are some other experiments that I've been doing.
So is this basically dip, place, dip again?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, it is. And then I know I'm running out of time. This is, I took a class, and it was called Taking It Out of Context. And these are a few little books that I made using some of my ephemera that I thought, well, hey, yeah, you know, this whole idea that you could make zines, or zines, is that how you, zines, and you could photocopy these, and you could, you know, you could give them to everybody, you know. I thought that was kind of a cool idea. So I've been, that was one of the ones I did in the class. And this was another maze book that I did using images of toys that were made with blocks. And so you start, and you can look through it, open it in different ways. And I love that whole idea about how, you know, this changing perspectives, you know, seeing it closed, seeing it open, and then in the end you can sort of see where you've been. But it was kind of like this little world, you know, that came about, that I really liked, you know. It was very fun. And so I made another one. I'm going to call these Tales of the Uncanny. Because I think that and here's another one, and I'll start that the other way. What I did is I drew them, and then I scanned them in, and then I fixed them all so that they wouldn't look so, you know, rough. And this one is called the Uncanny Nursery. You know, and as you look at it and open it in different ways, you will see the cookies are flying, the top is whirling, the cocoa's flipping, you know, and I just really had a lot of fun with that. And here's the girl, she's caught up in it, you know, the bubbling, turning into cotton candy, you know, kind of thing. So I think this could be a lot of fun, you know, these little maze books.
What's the size of the paper when it's all flattened out?
Let's see, that is 8.5 by 11, but you know how your printer has those little margins? I had to plan for that, so it's a slightly less than that, 8.5 by 11. And this is my last thing I'll show you, and then I'm really excited to answer any of your questions. I thought, well, hey, you know, I started looking up all these and say, are there any superstitions on clothing? And there's tons of them. You know, and like you shouldn't put your right shoe on, or you lose your hair, or don't ever put a hat on a bed. All these different things. Don't iron your husband's shirt tail, or he will be difficult to deal with. You know, all these different things, you know. So I thought, wouldn't this be fun to make some of these maze books and have them as like all in this little something, and they're all different superstitions about clothes. So what I did is these are just a random thing that I did, and I cut out all these shoes. And I thought, well, that would be fun if on the back side, when you open it all up, it tells what the superstition is, you know. So that's kind of what I'm working on is to do that for my next little. And I wanted to use my handmade paper and kind of embed some of the images. And what I did with these ones, I experimented. One of them is embedded, or it has a real thin. I put a double one sheet of a solid paper, and then I put a transparent paper over the top of the shoes. And then the other one, what I did is I just used cellulose. What is that called? Okay, it's a kind of a glue, but it's real watery, like a Japanese paste, and I pressed it really hard.
The methyl cellulose?
Yeah, methyl cellulose, that's right. And then when I dried it while it was wet with methyl cellulose. It would be super flat, and then it would be really married to the surface, and I could still fold it and stuff. Well, that's all that I brought. So is there anything you would like to ask and that I can?
How did you get started? I mean, what was the
You know how
inner
you know what happened was how I got into book arts actually was I was writing when I wrote my dissertation, I did it on telling life stories, and I had done this whole project, and it was called a descansos, and there were these little sort of shrine type things, and people were very intimidated when I talked about my project, like, oh gosh, they're going to have to build like an actual artwork. And so I thought one day I was going on my way I went to Pacifica Graduate Institute, and I went through John Wayne Airport, and there was a little display of book arts there. And I was blown away. I was like, every one of these books showed the hand of its maker. And I was really touched by that. And it never occurred to me that how powerful that could be. And some of them were just pages. Some of them were handmade. Some of them were die cut, you know, from the most elaborate to the simplest. And I thought, well, each one of these would be certainly different. And what happened was it kind of shaped the way I wanted to do a type of a dissertation where you would make something and you would really have conversations with other people, and then after the dissertation was over, then I would show the work somewhere, and then we'd have a different kind of a conversation about the work and about what happened. And so that's how I got into it. And so for the year before I did my dissertation, and I did this as an older adult, that was only like 10 years ago, I worked for a year telling my own stories in books, and I didn't know how to bind anything, so I used children's books that I painted with gesso, and I did a lot of things. I came at it kind of more like from an artist's point of view, but this last 2 years I've really been learning how to bind books, and I've been learning the other side of book arts too. And so I'm hoping, right now I'm feeling a little hemmed in by that, but I'm hoping that I can, broaden. So that's how I started working with the books. And I got to tell you, the books of the women were so incredible, and they were really neat. One woman, just to give you an example, her mom had been a dancer, and she had all these incredible pictures of her mother in costumes. And well, her mother, after she got to be like I think 18 or something like that, her parents said it's just not proper for someone your age to be dancing anymore. And so she became a singer, but she really didn't have the voice for it, and so injured her voice. And I thought, wow, what a story about injuring your voice. What a creative story. So she made this book, and I helped her. We used Photoshop, and we took this picture of her mother in this costume. Was incredibly beautiful, and she was doing a lot of lyrical movements, and we made her bigger and smaller and had her move across this stage that we created, and it was really wonderful. There were so many of them. They were all turned out really interesting in their own way and for their own value and for their own story. But the structure of the book, it limited, they had to make some choices, and what happened was it was a more personal, more intense, more deep look than they might have taken. One person in particular, they had a lot of bad things happen in their family, and they never thought about the good things. And she brought in all this fabric, and whenever she talked about the fabric, she would say, and this was my dad's, and then this was my mother, but then all these terrible things. So she decided to make it about the fabric. So we scanned the fabric in because it was too thick to use in a book. And it was really interesting because it was a blend of what her life was really like. It was bad, it was good, it was a lot of different things, and there was a lot of insight. So that was a really neat experience. Well, thank you very much. Been lovely.
Do you think that the toroidal form is particularly appropriate for certain kinds of subjects, but not for others? I mean, would you opt to do it again just out of interest, or would it have to be a? I do think it lends itself to a subject. One of the things it lends itself to, the two things that I can see for myself would be the mechanical. What I liked about the book that I made as an extension of Ken's class was his books are really about time and transformation, because he takes this one spot and he moves you, 360 degrees around, the time of year or something of that nature. And with mine, it was sort of like, it was the unfolding and the sort of like the more mechanical feeling of folding something out and seeing this, this mechanical world unfolding, and it had these kind of like weird roller coaster funhouse kind of thing. It lent itself to that. It could lend itself, I think, as he's used it really effectively. He likes to go to the Antarctic, and he loves to look at the light and the lack of light, and so he does a lot of work like that. And so what you'll see is there'll be this blackness, and then all of a sudden there's this light, and it's really beautiful because of the transitions that he shows. So for some of my other work, I don't think it would work so well. It worked really well for the land because I wanted to show like a gradation, and so you can look at the book from different vantage points, and it still kind of has an interest to it. But I think what's going to have to happen is one of those, choice points that comes along, like where I have a whole bunch of stuff, and then I go, like, how am I going to use this? And then suddenly, oh, that works too. So, yeah. And you're still collecting?
I know, ask my husband. I'm just now rearranging my office again. I have 2 workspaces. I've taken over the whole downstairs, and so now I'm out in the driveway making paper right now. And upstairs I have an office, and you know, I've learned to really organize things, but sometimes I find such great, you know, stuff with potential. I also make ephemera packets that I sometimes sell. I do at my studio tour because I want to pass it on. I sometimes come across something and I go, that is too cool to leave. And so I'll make up things that I think other people might be able to make into things, you know, and they seem to really like it. So I try to make them really, you know, like affordable, and they can, and I find things, I just have a knack for that, so I enjoy that very much. Yeah.
Terrific. Thank you so much,
Oh,
Deborah.
thank you.